I was walking slowly through the cemetery that morning, the kind of slow walk you take when your legs feel heavier than your heart can handle. In one hand, I carried a bunch of white lilies, and in the other, a faded photograph of my daughter. It's been years, but somehow her picture still feels alive to me, like it's holding on to her smile even though she's gone. Every step I took felt like I was dragging the past back up again, and by the time I reached her grave, my knees nearly gave out. I placed the flowers down, set the photo against the cold stone, and just let myself sink into that silence. I whispered the same words I always say, "Another year, my sweet girl." My voice cracked, and the breeze seemed to steal the words right out of my mouth. It still feels like yesterday sometimes. Her laughter, her footsteps running down the hall, the way the whole house smelled like the coffee she loved to brew in the mornings. I can almost hear her bursting through the door, dropping her bag and telling me about some wild idea she had at work. Sarah was a designer at an ad agency, full of energy, always the spark in the room. People said her smile could change the weather, and honestly, they weren't wrong. I remember one afternoon our neighbor, Mrs. Hill, leaned over the fence as Sarah dashed off to catch the bus and said, "Maggie, your daughter's made of sunshine." I laughed at the time, proud and embarrassed all at once. Now those words ache, because I can't bring that sunshine back no matter how hard I try. Even the smell of rain on the street after a storm feels like her to me, and it twists my stomach in ways I can't explain. It's been 3 years since they told me she died in that car crash, and it still lives in me like an open wound. They said it was quick. The car skidded on wet pavement, hit a pole. She was gone right there. The police, the doctors, they all repeated the same thing, like reading from a script. But for me, it wasn't just a crash. It was the moment my entire life collapsed. I remember coworkers bringing food, neighbors offering to sit with me, and I just sat in the middle of it all, numb, thinking how strange it was that I was still breathing while my daughter was not. Even now, 3 years later, I catch myself reaching for my phone, half expecting her name to pop up on the screen. Sometimes I see a girl in the crowd with the same hair or the same walk, and for one split second, I believe it's her. Then the truth hits me all over again, and it's like losing her twice. That morning, I ran my hand over her photo, tracing her face with my fingers. The stone was cold under my palm, and all I could think was how empty my chest feels without her. I wasn't just a 65-year-old woman kneeling at a grave. I was a mother with a hole in her heart that nothing on this earth could ever fill. The crash was so bad they told me the rescue team could barely recognize her body. They said she died right there at the scene, in the rain, in the middle of the night. Everyone believed it was just another tragic accident, the kind that happens when the roads are slick and the weather is against you. And I tried to believe that too, because what else could I do? But those words never filled the hole inside me. They only left me with silence and questions that still keep me awake. Sarah was my only child. When she died, it wasn't just losing a daughter. It was like my entire family tree got cut down to the root. No siblings, no other children, no one else to carry her laughter or her blood. Just me, sitting in a house that felt too quiet, walls that once echoed with her voice now pressing in on me. People came with flowers, casseroles, awkward hugs, but when they left, I was still alone with a space at the table that would never be filled again. Going to her grave became the only ritual that gave me a sense of connection. Every visit was like pulling off a scab, but I kept doing it because in some strange way, kneeling there made me feel close to her. I would touch the stone, trace the letters of her name and pretend she could hear me, that maybe some part of her was still around, listening. People always say time heals. I used to nod politely, but the truth is, it doesn't heal. It just shifts the weight around. Some days it feels lighter, other days it crushes me flat. As the years have passed, the pain hasn't faded. If anything, it digs in deeper. That morning, I sat staring at the stone where it said, "Beloved daughter," and I whispered, if only I could have done something, if only I could have stopped it. I told her how much I missed her, how the ache never left my chest, but the words always came mixed with guilt. Did I miss the signs? Could I have said something that would have kept her from getting in that car? Questions circle in my head every time I come here, like bees I can't swat away. I talk to her anyway because if I don't, the silence swallows me whole. The silence of the cemetery was suddenly broken, not by birds or rustling branches, but by the unmistakable sound of a child's sobs, sharp and painful in the still air. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, because I was so wrapped up in my own grief. But then I turned my head and saw her, a little girl sitting on the grass right by my daughter's grave, her small shoulders trembling as she leaned forward, whispering words that made my blood run cold. She was talking to someone who wasn't there, saying, "Mommy, why did you have to die? I wish you were here with me. I love you so much. I miss you so much." The words came out broken and uneven, but they cut through me as if she were speaking my own heart out loud. For a few seconds, I stood frozen, my hand still resting against the headstone, trying to understand what I was hearing. There was something unbearable about that tiny voice, carrying such heavy sorrow, and before I knew it, I was moving toward her. My knees ached as I pushed myself up, and my chest felt tight as if my body already knew something was terribly wrong. I walked closer, slow enough not to startle her, and my voice came out softer than I expected when I asked, "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? Are you all right?" The mother in me never died, no matter how long I had been alone, and it came out in that moment stronger than anything else. The girl lifted her head, and her face was streaked with tears, her eyes swollen and desperate. There was a look in them that no child should ever have to carry, a mixture of innocence and confusion that struck me like a blow. Between sobs, she managed to say, "I always come here. This is my mommy's grave, but I don't understand. It has someone else's name. It says Sarah Carter, but that's not her name." Her small hands pressed into her lap, and her lip quivered as she tried to make sense of the impossible. I felt my whole body stiffen as the words sank in, and suddenly the air around me felt heavy, almost unbreathable. My daughter's grave, my Sarah's grave, was the place this child believed her mother rested. I lowered myself onto the grass beside her because standing any longer felt impossible, and I asked, as gently as I could, "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "My daughter Sarah is buried here. Why would you say this is your mother's grave?" She looked at me with those wet eyes that seemed too big for her little face and shook her head helplessly. "I don't know, ma'am," she whispered, her voice fragile and shaking. "My daddy always told me my mommy was buried here. He brings me here and we sit together. But if that's true, then why does it say Sarah? That's not her name." She sounded so lost, so desperately certain of what she had been told, and yet so unsure at the same time, and it broke something inside me that had already been cracked for years. I couldn't find answers, not then, not in that moment, but I wrapped my arm carefully around her tiny shoulders and pulled her a little closer, the way I would have if she were my own. The warmth of her small body against me felt both heartbreaking and strangely grounding, and I said, with more resolve than I felt, "Then something isn't right. I don't understand it either, sweetheart, but we're going to figure it out." I pulled the little girl gently against my side, my arm around her thin shoulders, and for a second I didn't know what else to say except the truth. "I don't understand any of this." She sniffled, wiped at her face with the back of her hand, and I asked softly, "Sweetheart, what's your name?" She looked up at me through the tears, and a small, almost shy smile flickered for just a moment as she whispered, "Lily." Something in me shifted right then, like a door opening. I nodded slowly, almost like I was making a promise to both of us, and I thought, I'll help her find answers, and maybe, just maybe, that will help me find peace too. "Lily, honey, tell me about your mom," I asked, my voice as gentle as I could make it. I handed her the crumpled tissue I always carried in my purse, and when she took it, her little hand brushed against mine, warm and trembling. I could see how much she wanted to talk, how badly she needed someone to listen, and my eyes must have told her it was safe. She dabbed at her cheeks and took a shaky breath, and then the words began to come. "My mommy's name was Anna. Anna Parker," she said, and her voice had that soft, broken quality children get when they're carrying more weight than they should. I remember how she used to sing to me, how she smiled all the time. She paused, her eyes glazing over as if she were pulling the pictures out of memory, and I swear I could almost hear a lullaby hanging in the still air around us. She left when I was 5. They told me she got very sick and died. They told me she was buried here. The ache in my chest deepened as I listened, because every detail she gave me was a mirror to my own grief. This little girl had been living with the same hole I had, only smaller and sharper, and now she was being forced to mourn at a stone that carried someone else's name. I wanted to wrap her up and tell her she would never have to hurt alone again. I wanted to tell her that life couldn't possibly be cruel enough to steal her mother and steal the truth from her, too. Just then, I heard footsteps quick and heavy on the gravel path, and when I turned, I saw a man hurrying toward us, his face drawn and anxious, his eyes darting straight to the child. He crouched down beside us, out of breath, but certain in his words. "It's true," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I've brought Lily here many times. I thought I was comforting her, telling her that her mother was resting in this place." His hand trembled as he touched his daughter's arm, and when he looked up at me, there was confusion there, but also a kind of desperate hope, like maybe I held an answer he'd been afraid to ask for. The man's words came out heavy, like he'd been carrying them for too long. "I never understood why the stone has someone else's name on it. I always thought it must have been some mistake." His voice cracked between confusion and a quiet kind of anger, like he'd been trying to bury his own questions just to keep going for his daughter's sake. He reached out his hand and said, "My name is Daniel. I'm Lily's father." I took his hand, and there was something raw in his grip, as if he hadn't held on to anyone in years. "I'm Janet," I answered, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Two strangers tied together by the same patch of earth, both of us searching for someone we'd lost. Daniel kept talking, his eyes fixed on the headstone like he was seeing it for the first time. "When Anna died, I was so broken I couldn't think straight. I didn't look at the hospital records. I didn't question the funeral home. They told me she was buried here, and I believed them. I wanted to believe them, because I couldn't handle one more layer of pain." His words landed heavy, and I felt each one in my chest, because I knew exactly what it meant to be too numb to ask questions. As I listened, I felt something stir inside me that I hadn't felt in years, a kind of sharp determination pushing through the fog of grief. I knew what it meant to lose the person who carried your whole world, and I couldn't let this man and his little girl live in doubt any longer. "Daniel," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "there has to be a mistake here, and I'm going to find out what it is." His eyes flicked up at me with gratitude, and I could see the same hunger for truth in them that had just taken root in me. He let out a shaky breath and whispered almost to himself, "If your daughter is here, then where is Anna?" The question hung between us, sharp and unbearable, and Lily pressed closer to his side, clutching his arm like she was afraid of losing him too. My heart clenched as I watched them, because I knew that limbo, that torment of not knowing, and I couldn't let them live in it any longer. "We need to go to the cemetery office," I told them firmly. "Now, we need to see the records. It's the only way to start untangling this." We walked together toward the small brick office tucked at the edge of the cemetery, Daniel holding Lily's hand tightly while I tried to steady my own thoughts. My heart pounded as we stepped inside, and the smell of old paper and stale coffee filled the air. Behind a worn wooden desk sat a man in his 50s, his face sagging with the kind of tiredness that comes from years of routine. He barely looked up at us, and for a moment I wondered if he would brush us off before we even spoke. I forced myself forward, straightening my shoulders though my knees still felt weak, and I said, "Good morning. We need to see the burial records for a woman named Sarah Carter. There's a chance there's been a mistake, and it has to be cleared up, for the sake of this little girl who's been told her mother rests here." My voice came out firmer than I felt inside, and I caught Daniel glancing at me with a mix of hope and surprise, like he wasn't sure anyone could get through to this man. The clerk lifted his eyes then, frowning as if we had just told him the sky was falling. He snapped the folder on his desk shut and said flatly, "Mistakes like that don't happen here. Our records are exact. Every document is checked and double-checked." His tone was clipped, defensive, the kind of voice people use when they'd rather send you away than get involved. "What exactly are you trying to say? Slow down and explain yourselves." I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't back away. "Listen," I said, and my voice carried an edge now, not from anger, but from the sheer weight of desperation. "On the headstone, it says, Sarah Carter, my daughter's name. But this man insists his wife is buried there. His little girl comes here thinking this is her mother's grave. Something is wrong, and I need to know how in the world this could happen." I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, but I refused to let it silence me. The clerk's frown deepened, his pen frozen in his hand, and for a long moment he just stared at me, probably deciding whether to push back harder or to listen. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he pulled the big leather-bound register toward him, flipping it open with the reluctance of someone who already knows what he's about to find. He muttered under his breath, but started scanning the pages. And in that moment, I felt the air in the room shift. We weren't leaving without answers. The clerk finally sighed and muttered, "Fine, I'll check the records," though he said it like he already knew the answer. "But I'm telling you, something like this just doesn't happen." His fingers tapped at the old keyboard, papers shuffled across the desk, and the room grew heavy with a silence so tense I could feel it in my throat. Daniel kept glancing at me, like he was reading my face for clues, while Lily pressed herself against his leg, holding his hand with the kind of grip only fear gives a child. Minutes stretched like hours until the man frowned deeper, leaning over the screen. "This is strange," he muttered under his breath, almost as if he didn't want us to hear. He flipped through a stack of yellowing files and finally looked up, his confidence dimmed. "Our archives show that a few years back there was an error, a mix-up in how some graves were marked. It should have been corrected, but for some reason it wasn't." His voice trailed off and my stomach clenched so hard it hurt. I leaned forward, my words sharper than I intended. "What kind of error?" My voice filled the room before I could soften it, and for the first time the man's eyes flickered with unease. "I can't give you exact details right now," he admitted, shifting in his chair. "I'll have to run a deeper check, cross-reference the old files with the system. It may take some time." "Then do it," I insisted, my tone leaving no room for refusal. "We need answers." The clerk hesitated, then gave a stiff nod. "All right, I promise I'll look into it." But even as he said the words, I saw doubt written across his tired face, and I knew this was only the beginning. When we stepped back out into the sunlight, the air felt different, heavier with both hope and fear. I told myself we had taken the first step, but my mind was already crowded with more questions than I could count. Daniel murmured his thanks for my determination, though I could see the worry still written across his face. And then Lily, her little voice trembling but full of belief, whispered, "Miss Janet, you'll help me find my mommy, right?" I looked into her wide, searching eyes, and even though my own heart was breaking, I answered with all the certainty I could gather, "Yes, sweetheart. We'll find out the truth. Together." That night, I barely slept. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, the shadows moving across it as the hours dragged on, and all I could think about was Sarah's grave. My mind kept circling the same loop. Daniel's face when he spoke about Anna, Lily's small voice calling the headstone her mother's resting place, the cruel mismatch of names carved into stone. None of it added up, and the more I replayed it, the more I felt like the ground under my life had shifted. The thought that wouldn't leave me was the one that made my stomach twist. What if it isn't even Sarah in that grave? What if Anna was the one buried there all along? And if that were true, who was to blame for this awful mistake? My chest tightened as memories came rushing back of the day I got the call, how the shock hit me like a physical blow. I could barely breathe, let alone think straight. My friends and the hospital staff handled the funeral arrangements, and I let them because I was too shattered to question anything. I signed papers I didn't read, nodded to decisions I didn't make, and convinced myself it had to be true. But now, lying there with the dark pressing in, I realized I had never actually seen proof. I had never checked the documents or asked the questions I should have. And once the doubt took root, it spread fast, filling every corner of my mind. The idea struck me suddenly, sharp and terrifying, but also like the only way forward. An exhumation. The word felt heavy, almost unbearable, but the thought of finally knowing the truth, whether Sarah was really there or not, lit a small, stubborn spark of hope inside me. By the time dawn crept through my curtains, I couldn't stand another minute in that bed. I pulled myself up, my body sore from tossing all night, and dressed without even caring if my clothes matched. I sipped half a cup of tea, more out of habit than hunger, and told myself I had to move. I needed guidance, someone steady who could tell me if this wild, frightening idea had any chance of becoming real. So I drove to the clinic where I'd always gone, the one place that felt safe when everything else in my life spun out of control. The halls smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, the same as always, and the walls were lined with framed degrees that seemed to promise answers. Dr. David Wilson had been my doctor for years. Calm, thoughtful, a man who never rushed me, even when the waiting room was full. That morning, when I stepped into his office, he looked up, took one glance at my face, and asked with quiet concern, "Janet, what's troubling you?" Dr. Wilson had been my doctor for years, and I trusted him in a way I didn't trust many people anymore. He had seen me through smaller storms before, always listening, never making me feel rushed or foolish. That morning, the second I stepped into his office, he caught the look on my face. "Janet," he said gently, his brow knitting, "what's going on? You look so troubled." The words almost undid me right there, but I pulled myself together enough to sit across from him, folding my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. The weight of what I wanted to say pressed down so hard I thought I might choke on it. Finally, I whispered, "I don't even know how to put this, but I'm starting to doubt that the person in my daughter's grave is really her." Saying it out loud felt like breaking a taboo, like I had just confessed something no mother should ever have to say, and yet once it was spoken, I couldn't take it back. He frowned, not dismissively, but in the way of a man who takes things seriously, and he motioned for me to go on. So I told him about Lily, about Daniel, about the headstone carrying Sarah's name, while a child insisted her own mother rested there. I told him about the cemetery records and the hint of a mix-up years ago. And then, with my heart hammering in my throat, I asked the only question that mattered. Can I have her grave exhumed? Can we run a DNA test so I'll finally know the truth? Dr. Wilson leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath, and finally shook his head. "Janet, an exhumation is a very serious step. You can't just request it on your own. It requires legal approval, sometimes from the district attorney's office, often even from a judge. Only with that kind of order could anyone authorize disturbing a grave." His voice wasn't cold, but it was steady, and I could feel how carefully he was choosing each word, not to crush me, but to make sure I understood the wall in front of me. I felt my face tighten, my hope faltering, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Then I'll do it," I said, my voice shaking but sure. "I don't care how hard it is. I need to know the truth. I can't live another day with this doubt." For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't in a long time, Not just grief, but resolve. Dr. Wilson folded his hands on the desk and spoke carefully, like he wanted me to hear every word. "Then you'll need to start with the district attorney's office," he said. "You have to file a petition that clearly explains your suspicions. If they find your reasons convincing, the case can move to court. Only then will you have the legal authority for an exhumation." His tone was calm but serious, and for the first time in days, I felt like someone was giving me a real path forward, even if it was steep. I nodded, my throat tight but my voice steady. "Thank you. I'll take care of it right away." Gratitude rushed through me, mixed with fear and determination, but underneath it all was something solid. Resolve. I wasn't just drifting in grief anymore. For the first time since Sarah's death, I had a plan, and that alone gave me enough strength to stand taller. "As soon as you get the authorization, we can move quickly," Dr. Wilson assured me. He scribbled notes on a pad, already preparing for what would come next. "I'll make sure everything is ready on my end so there's no wasted time. I understand how much this means to you, Janet, and how important it is to finally settle this." His steadiness felt like a hand on my back, holding me up when I was close to falling. I thanked him again, my words tumbling out faster than I intended. "Your help means more to me than I can say. With you guiding me through this, maybe we can finally bring peace to everyone caught in this nightmare." As I left his office, something shifted inside me. The sense that I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was a woman chasing the truth, no matter how hard the road ahead might be. The next few days tested me more than I expected. I walked into one government building after another, clutching paperwork, repeating my story, trying to make strangers understand. At the district attorney's office, they looked at me like I was fragile, shaking their heads, telling me mistakes like this almost never happen. They spoke as if I were chasing shadows, but I held my ground, repeating the same words over and over. "I have reason to believe there's been a terrible error, and I need the truth." Dr. Wilson leaned forward, his voice steady but firm, and said, "Then start with the district attorney's office. You'll need to file a formal petition, laying out the reasons you believe there's been a mistake. If they find your argument convincing, it could move to court, and from there, you might be granted the right to exhume." It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was clear, solid advice. And for the first time, I felt like the fog of confusion was lifting, replaced by a hard, narrow path I had to follow. I nodded, holding his gaze, even as my stomach fluttered with nerves. "Thank you," I said, my voice more confident than I felt inside. "I'll get started right away." Gratitude and fear wrestled inside me, but beneath them both was something new: determination. For once, I wasn't just reacting to loss. I was choosing to act. "As soon as you secure permission, we'll be ready," Dr. Wilson promised, jotting notes in his pad. "I'll prepare everything on my end so there's no delay. I know how much this weighs on you, Janet, and I'll do all I can to help." His words steadied me, like a hand pressed gently against my back, and as I rose to leave, I realized just how much I relied on his calm presence. I thanked him again, my voice almost breaking. "Your help means more than I can put into words. I only hope with your guidance we can bring some peace, not just for me, but for everyone caught in this confusion." Walking out of that office, I carried something I hadn't felt in years, the sense that I was no longer completely powerless. The grief was still there, but now it was welded to resolve. The following days were harder than I imagined. I walked into one government building after another, clutching folders of paperwork, repeating my story until I sounded like a broken record. At the district attorney's office, the first man I spoke to raised his eyebrows and told me flatly, "Cases like this don't happen, ma'am." He spoke gently, almost dismissively, as if I were fragile, as if doubt itself was a symptom of grief. But I stood my ground, repeating the truth as I knew it. "I have reason to believe a serious mistake was made, and I need it investigated." I was relentless. Every office I stepped into, every official who tried to wave me off, I repeated the same words. I have reason to believe a mistake was made. I cannot live without knowing the truth about my daughter. Some looked at me with pity, others with annoyance, but I never stopped. The cemetery records were my anchor, proof that something had gone wrong, and I carried them like armor. Finally, after endless conversations and consultations, someone listened. My petition was accepted, and the next step was waiting for a court decision. Those weeks of waiting stretched longer than I thought possible. Every morning I walked to the mailbox with my heart pounding, only to find it empty. And every night I lay awake, staring into the dark, my mind looping the same question. Who was really buried in that grave? I couldn't read, couldn't watch TV, couldn't distract myself from the gnawing uncertainty. It was like living with a stone in my chest. One afternoon, when the silence in my house felt too heavy to bear, Daniel came by with Lily. I hadn't expected them, but when Lily rushed into my arms, hugging me tight, I nearly broke down. She whispered, "Miss Janet, I know you'll figure it out. You'll find my mommy, won't you?" Her little voice was so trusting, so sure that my heart ached, but I forced myself to smile. "Yes, sweetheart," I told her, brushing her hair back from her face. "We'll find the truth. We just have to be patient a little longer." Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, watching me carefully. He noticed the tired lines around my eyes, the weight I carried, and said quietly, "Janet, if you need help, just say the word. I'll go with you anywhere." His sincerity, the way he spoke with steady conviction, reached me in a way few things had since this began. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you, Daniel. That means more than I can say. For now, though, it's out of my hands." That evening, they stayed for dinner. We shared a simple meal, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel so empty. Laughter even slipped through in small moments, Lily chattering about school, Daniel telling a story about their old dog, and though the worry never left me, I felt a flicker of warmth that I thought I'd lost forever. A week later, at last, the letter from the court arrived in my mailbox. My hands trembled as I held it, knowing my world might change with whatever was written inside. When the letter finally came, my hands shook so badly I could hardly tear the envelope open. I unfolded the papers and read the words over and over, hardly believing them. The court had granted permission for the exhumation. I didn't know whether to cry from relief or collapse under the weight of it, but one thing was clear. The first step toward the truth had been taken. That same afternoon I called Dr. Wilson, my voice trembling as I said, "The court approved it. They gave me permission." He didn't sound surprised, only steady the way he always did. "That's good news, Janet. Now you'll need to contact the county medical examiner's office. They'll arrange the exhumation and handle the DNA testing. It won't be easy to go through, but this is the right path." His calmness was the anchor I needed, and I thanked him with tears burning my eyes. I wasted no time. The very next morning, I drove to the medical examiner's office, a gray building that smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. They treated me with professionalism, but there was a weight in their voices too. They explained that the process would take time, that scheduling the team and preparing everything was delicate work. They promised to move quickly, and I nodded, clinging to every assurance like a lifeline. The waiting nearly broke me. Days stretched into nights filled with restless dreams. I would jolt awake drenched in sweat, haunted by visions of an empty coffin, or worse, the face of a stranger in the place where my daughter should have been. Sometimes I whispered into the dark, "Sarah, where are you? Please let me find you." Each morning I dragged myself up, living in that fragile space between hope and dread. Finally, the day arrived. Daniel met me outside the cemetery gates, Lily staying home this time, too young for what was about to happen. The medical team unloaded their equipment with quiet efficiency, their voices low, their movements practiced. I stood there clutching my coat around me, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the sound of the wind through the trees. And then, with one last breath, I followed them to the grave. I stood a few steps back, watching as the specialists worked with slow, practiced hands to open the grave. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest, every thud echoing in my ears. Daniel placed his hand gently on my shoulder and murmured, "It's going to be all right, Janet. We'll finally know the truth." I wanted to believe him, but the words slid over me without sinking in. My eyes stayed fixed on the men in gloves, on the earth being lifted, on the moment I'd feared and prayed for all at once. When they finally raised the casket and carefully uncovered the remains, my knees went weak. The air felt heavy, thick with earth and sorrow, and I gripped the edge of my coat to keep myself steady. One of the specialists, his face solemn, came over and said quietly, "We'll do everything we can to confirm the identity. The DNA testing will take a few weeks, but you'll have answers." I nodded quickly, my throat tight, as if I could hold myself together by sheer force of will, but inside I was unraveling. That night the images replayed in my head over and over. The dirt falling away, the careful packing of bones into sterile containers, the finality of it all. By the time I sat on my front porch, the sun was bleeding across the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting long shadows over the garden Sarah and I had once tended together. The flowers caught the last light like they were storing it for the night, and I thought about how many evenings we had spent here side by side, laughing about nothing, our hands dirty from planting. Now the silence felt like a stranger sitting beside me. Memories pressed in harder than ever. I kept seeing Sarah as she had been, young, vibrant, dirt smudged on her cheeks as she crouched in the soil, her eyes glinting with some secret thought. I remembered one afternoon just weeks before she was gone, when she said something that at the time I brushed aside. "Mom," she told me while patting down the earth around a new plant, "there are things in this world you have to do, even when they feel wrong." Back then, I laughed, thinking it was just one of her dramatic turns of phrase. But now those words circled in my head like a riddle I hadn't solved, carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. As the sun sank lower, I wrapped my arms around myself, the evening air cool against my skin, and whispered her name into the quiet. Waiting for the DNA results would be another kind of torment, but I knew I couldn't stop now. The truth was out there, tangled somewhere between the past and the present. And no matter what it revealed, I had to face it. "What did you mean that day, Sarah?" I whispered into the empty evening air, my chest tightening with unease. Her words from years ago kept circling back to me, carrying a weight I hadn't recognized at the time. I remembered how sometimes she seemed far away even when she was sitting right in front of me, as if she was carrying something heavy she couldn't share. That haunted look in her eyes had felt like a passing shadow back then, but now, replaying it, it felt like a warning I had ignored. One memory came back sharper than the rest, a dinner where I noticed her smile didn't reach her eyes. I remembered setting my fork down and asking, "Honey, are you all right?" She had smiled, nodded, and insisted she was fine, but her eyes told a different story. They flickered with something I couldn't name. At the time, I let it go, telling myself she would open up when she was ready. Now I could barely forgive myself for not pushing harder. I should have asked again. I should have demanded answers. Looking back, the pieces began to fall into place in ways that chilled me. Her words about having to do things that felt wrong, the way she drifted into silence some evenings, the far-off stare she tried to hide. All of it formed a picture I had been too blinded by love and trust to see. My heart clenched with the growing suspicion that whatever had taken her from me might not have been as simple as an accident. There was something bigger hidden in the shadows, and I could feel it pressing closer. Weeks passed in a blur of restless nights and endless waiting, until finally the call came. The DNA results were ready. My legs felt weak as I drove to Dr. Wilson's office, my mind repeating every possible outcome, none of which I was truly prepared for. When I walked in, he greeted me with the same calm presence he always carried, but I could see the envelope in his hand, and it pulled my breath tight in my chest. I sat down across from him, gripping the arms of the chair as if they could hold me together. My eyes locked on the envelope as he slid it open, his face carefully neutral, his voice steady but kind. "Here are the DNA results," he said, his tone carrying no judgment, no assumption, just the quiet weight of truth about to be revealed. I drew in a deep breath, though it felt like my lungs had turned to stone, and waited for the words that would change everything. Dr. Wilson looked me straight in the eye and said, "The remains we tested do not match your daughter's DNA." For a moment, the entire room spun around me. The sound of his voice kept echoing in my ears, but the meaning hit like a blow to the chest. It felt as if the air had been sucked clean out of the office. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might rip through my ribs, and my knees nearly gave way beneath me. I grabbed the edge of his desk, clinging to it just to stay upright. That can't be true," I whispered, barely able to hear my own voice. The world blurred, colors smearing together, and I thought I might collapse right there on the floor. Dr. Wilson moved quickly, guiding me back into the chair, his hand firm but gentle on mine. "Sit down, Janet, please. Breathe slowly," he urged, sliding a glass of water toward me. My hands shook so badly that the water sloshed against the rim as I brought it to my lips. No, I muttered, my voice trembling as much as my fingers. "If that's not Sarah, then who is buried there?" The tears came hot and fast, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't hold them back anymore. "I need to know," I choked out, my throat raw. "If it isn't my daughter in that grave, then where is she? Where is my Sarah?" My whole body shook as I clutched the glass, staring at him through a haze of grief and fear. Every memory of her laugh, her voice, her hugs, crashed against me like waves, leaving me gasping. The one thing worse than believing she was dead was suddenly realizing I didn't even know the truth. Dr. Wilson's voice softened, though I could see the weight of the moment reflected in his eyes. "I know this is unbearable, Janet, but we will find out what happened. It will take time, and it won't be easy. But you are not alone in this." I squeezed my hands together until my knuckles ached, trying to anchor myself in that small piece of certainty. My breathing was uneven, ragged, but somewhere beneath the shock, a fierce determination began to rise. If Sarah wasn't in that grave, then I would not stop until I found out where she was, or who had hidden the truth from me. Panic washed over me so hard I thought I might drown in it. My world, already fragile, seemed to shatter into pieces I couldn't gather. When I finally steadied my breathing enough to speak, my voice came out as little more than a whisper. "Doctor, I won't stop until I know the truth. You have to help me find a way." Dr. Wilson met my eyes with calm determination and said, "We will find a way, Janet. But you must not rush. You have to stay strong and follow the right steps." His words gave me something solid to cling to, even as everything inside me felt like quicksand. When I left his office, the sky was gray and heavy, the kind of sky that mirrored the weight pressing down on me. My body was still shaking, my mind reeling, but underneath the fear, a new strength began to form. I looked up into the clouds and whispered, "For you, Sarah, I'll do whatever it takes." It was a promise. Not only to her, but to myself. No matter how deep I had to dig, no matter how many doors slammed in my face, I would not stop. That afternoon, though, the shock clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake off. I wandered my small apartment, moving from one room to another, unable to sit still. My thoughts collided in a storm of questions. If Sarah wasn't in that grave, then who was? How could this have happened? Who had failed us? Or worse, who had lied? I pressed my palms against my temples, whispering to myself, "It can't be real." But if it is, someone is responsible. The silence of the house only made the questions louder, bouncing off the walls until I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to move, to do something, anything, that would bring me closer to the truth. The answer had to be somewhere, buried not just in the ground but in the paperwork, the records, the details that everyone else had overlooked. My heart told me I couldn't let this rest another day. So I grabbed my coat and keys with shaking hands and made a decision that felt both desperate and inevitable. I would go back to the cemetery office, the place where this nightmare had begun to unravel. Somewhere in their records, in their mistakes, was a clue to where my daughter really was. And until I found it, I knew there would be no peace for me, or for Sarah. The moment I stepped into the cemetery office, the anger that had been building in me all night came pouring out. I went straight to the same clerk who had handled my case before, my voice shaking but sharp. "Explain this to me," I demanded, my words louder than I intended. "How could this happen? Was it your mistake? Did you mix up the bodies? Do you even understand what you've done?" My chest was burning, and I could feel every nerve in my body pulled tight. The man, clearly used to people unleashing their grief at him, didn't raise his voice. He lifted his hands as if to calm me and said, "Mrs. Walker, I understand your concern, but I assure you the paperwork was filed correctly. We only record the burial details based on what the funeral home provides to us." His calm tone only fueled my fury, as though he was trying to wash his hands of it all. "What if you missed something?" I shot back, my throat tightening with emotion. "What if my daughter is lying somewhere else entirely because someone here didn't check? Do you realize what that means?" My voice cracked, and I hated how close I was to breaking down in front of him. He paused, his eyes narrowing just a little, and then he answered firmly, "There is no way such a mistake happened here." On the day of a funeral, everything is processed under strict supervision. If there was an error, it did not happen in this office. His words landed like a door slamming in my face. No matter how hard I pressed, he wasn't going to give me anything else. I clenched my jaw, holding back the scream of frustration building in me, and turned to leave before the tears broke loose. The cold air outside hit me like a slap, but instead of calming me, it only stoked the fire inside. If the truth wasn't here, then I would keep moving until I found it. The next stop was the morgue. My heart pounded as I walked through the sterile halls, the scent of disinfectant sharp in the air. At the front desk, I found an administrator and forced my voice to stay even, though my hands trembled against the counter. "I need to know something," I said, each word carefully measured. "Are you certain that my daughter's body was ever released for burial? Can you confirm that it was really hers?" The words nearly stuck in my throat, but I pushed them out, desperate for an answer I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. The administrator looked at me with mild surprise before turning to his records. After a few minutes of typing and flipping through files, he said firmly, "Yes." The body was released to the family on the day of the funeral. Everything is documented. There was no mistake here. His tone was calm, but it felt like a wall closing in on me. My throat tightened, and I couldn't hold back anymore. "So you're telling me you're absolutely certain there was no mix-up?" My voice rose sharper than I intended, trembling with anger and fear. He straightened, his expression professional, almost detached. "That's correct. We monitor every procedure carefully. There is no chance of an error on our side." The finality in his words crushed me. I wanted to scream, to demand more, but I could see I wouldn't get another inch out of him. It was like every door I knocked on slammed shut the moment I asked for answers. I walked out of the morgue with my chest hollow and heavy, each step dragging me deeper into despair. It felt like every effort to chase the truth only left me more lost than before. My tears blurred the street ahead of me, and the weight of helplessness pressed down until it almost turned into numbness. Rage, sorrow, and hopelessness tumbled together until I could barely tell one from the other. Then, through my haze, I noticed a sign across the street. Bold letters on a weathered facade. "Private Investigator." I stopped in my tracks. My first thought was that it was desperate. maybe even foolish, but another part of me whispered, maybe this is where the truth begins. Without giving myself time to second-guess it, I crossed the street and stood before the door, my hand hesitating only a second before pushing it open. The next morning I returned, steadier this time, to meet with the man whose name was painted on the glass, Mark Sullivan. As soon as I stepped into his office, he rose from behind a cluttered desk stacked with folders and papers, extending a hand with a firm but welcoming grip. "Good morning. What can I do for you?" he asked, motioning to the chair opposite his. I set my bag carefully beside me, sat down, and took a long breath, ready to open the darkest chapter of my life to a stranger, in the hope he could help me solve it. I took a deep breath before I spoke, feeling the weight of every word. "Mr. Sullivan," I began, my voice shaking though my resolve was steady. "I've learned that the remains buried under my daughter's name are not hers. I need to know where my daughter truly is, and if she's alive, I need to find her." Saying it out loud felt impossible, yet freeing, as if I'd finally put my nightmare into words. He leaned forward, his face growing serious, and pulled a small notebook and pen from the desk. "This is a very serious matter, Mrs. Walker. If there's any information you haven't shared yet, now is the time. Even the smallest detail could matter." His calm, professional tone carried weight, and I could see he was already slipping into the rhythm of an investigation. I tried to collect my thoughts, pulling fragments from the fog of memory. After the DNA results, I started replaying those last days with Sarah. There were strange phone calls, times when she seemed distracted, almost like she was carrying something heavy she couldn't talk about. At the time, I brushed it off. But now, looking back, every one of those moments feels important. My throat tightened as I spoke, but I forced myself to continue, recounting each odd detail I could recall. "You mentioned phone calls," Sullivan pressed gently. "Do you know who she was talking to? Do you have any record of those calls?" I shook my head, frustration burning through me. "Number, I don't. I wasn't paying attention back then. I didn't think it mattered." The words felt like a confession, another reminder of the chances I had missed. He nodded without judgment, jotting notes quickly, his mind already racing ahead. By the end of our meeting, he looked at me with steady determination. "We'll start by tracing those calls," he said firmly. "We'll talk to the people who were closest to her. Piece by piece, we'll uncover what happened. I promise you this, Mrs. Walker. You're not alone in this. I'll do everything in my power to find your daughter." His words struck deep, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt I had someone standing beside me in the fight for the truth. A few days later, Mark called and asked me to meet him at a small cafe downtown. I remember sitting at the table, my palms damp against the porcelain cup of coffee, watching him spread out folders, photographs, and notes like pieces of a puzzle. My heart hammered because I knew whatever he was about to show me could change everything I thought I knew about Sarah. "Take a look at these," he said, sliding several photographs across the table. Faces stared back at me. Some circled in red. "I spoke with some of your daughter's former colleagues. It seems she was spending time with people tied to dangerous business. These men," he tapped the photos, "are well known in criminal circles." His words landed like ice water, and I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. "Oh my God," I whispered, clutching the edge of the table. My whole body shook as fear and disbelief tangled inside me. "Mark, this is worse than I ever imagined. What was she thinking? How could she get involved with people like this?" My voice cracked, heavy with dread, but beneath the fear was something harder, the determination to understand why. He nodded, his expression grave, and pulled out a folded map marked with dots and scribbled notes. "There's more. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she was going to places far outside her normal routine. These locations," he pointed at the marks, "are tied to illegal activity. It suggests she wasn't just brushing past them. She may have been caught up in something." His voice was calm, but the meaning was explosive. I stared at the map, the names of streets and neighborhoods blurring as my mind struggled to connect the image of my daughter. The girl who planted flowers with me, who laughed over silly TV shows, with this hidden life I had never known. The cafe around us seemed to fade away. All I could think was that Sarah had been walking a path I didn't see, a dangerous one, and whatever truth lay at the end of it, I had to be brave enough to face it. I leaned closer to the map, tracing the red marks with my eyes, committing every street and location to memory. My voice trembled, but my determination held steady. We need to go there, Mark. We need to talk to people, ask questions, find out what she was doing in those places. If she was mixed up with these men, it's terrifying. But it also means there's a chance she's still alive. Oh, God, I want so badly to believe she's alive. The words spilled out before I could stop them, my heart pounding with equal parts fear and hope. Mark studied me with his steady gaze, cautious but understanding. I agree, Janet, he said slowly, but we can't just rush in. These people can be dangerous and we need to handle this carefully. I'll set up a way to meet contacts who can talk, and I'll make sure we take precautions. But you need to be prepared. This won't be easy. His tone was serious, the kind of voice that let me know he wasn't trying to scare me, only to keep me alive. I met his eyes, my own brimming with the same fire that had carried me this far. I'll do whatever it takes, Mark, I said, my voice low but firm. I won't stop until I know the truth about Sarah. In that moment, I felt something inside me click into place, a resolve stronger than grief, stronger than fear. Whatever waited for me out there, I was ready to face it. The following evening, we drove together, the city lights fading behind us as we made our way toward the outskirts. My stomach twisted with nerves, but I kept my eyes on the road ahead, clutching the straps of my bag as if it held more than just belongings, as if it held courage. Mark parked the car a distance away, choosing a spot where we wouldn't be noticed. That building there, he said, pointing to a shadowed structure at the end of a gravel lot. It's an old warehouse. According to one of my sources, it's used as a meeting place for certain people. Sarah's name came up in connection with this spot more than once. I stared at the dark outline of the warehouse, its broken windows glinting faintly under the streetlights. The place looked abandoned, forgotten, but the weight in my chest told me there were stories hidden inside those walls. Maybe the trail would finally lead me closer to my daughter, or maybe it would open doors I wasn't ready to face. Either way, I knew we were standing at the edge of something that could change everything. I sat in the car staring at the warehouse, my stomach twisting tighter with every passing minute. "Do you think she could be in there?" I asked, pressing my hand against the foggy glass, straining to see something in the dark outline of the building. Mark shook his head slowly. "I don't know," he admitted, "but there's activity here. Something's going on inside. We'll wait until it's fully dark. Going in now would be too risky." His calmness didn't quiet my nerves, but it steadied me enough to stay put. The minutes dragged like hours. My mind spun through every scenario. Sarah tied up inside, Sarah hidden in some back room, or worse, Sarah's trail long gone. By the time the last light drained from the sky and the world turned black, my breath came shallow and quick. Mark checked his notes one last time, then looked at me. "It's time. We have to be careful. Are you ready?" I inhaled deeply, forcing the air into my lungs, and nodded. "I'm ready. We need to do this." We moved quietly, sticking to the shadows as we approached the warehouse. The gravel crunched under our shoes despite our best efforts, and my pulse beat so loudly I was sure someone could hear it from inside. The heavy door hung slightly ajar, swinging with the breeze as if someone had left in a hurry. Mark gave me a sharp look and whispered, "This could be a trap." Then, pushing gently, he stepped through first, his body tense with caution. I followed, my heart climbing higher into my throat. The air inside was damp and sour, carrying the smell of mold and rust. Darkness pressed in around us, broken only by the faint drip of water, somewhere in the distance, and the sudden scurrying of a rat along the wall. The silence felt alive, dangerous. Every step we took seemed louder than it should, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, afraid of making a sound that would give us away. Then we reached a table in the corner, cluttered with signs of life. Cigarette butts still smelling of smoke, empty cans scattered across the surface. My eyes locked on the last item, and my breath caught. A woman's coat lay folded over the chair, worn but familiar. My body froze, the blood rushing to my head as I stared at it. My mind screamed one name: Sarah. The moment my eyes landed on that coat, the breath caught in my chest. "That's Sarah's coat," I whispered, my voice trembling as though the words themselves might shatter me. She was here. My God, she was here. My hands shook as I reached for it, the fabric rough under my fingers, but achingly familiar. Mark laid a steady hand on my shoulder, grounding me in that dizzying moment. "We're close, Janet," he murmured. "Very close." We moved deeper into the warehouse, the shadows swallowing us as the corridor stretched ahead. My ears strained at every sound until suddenly I heard it. Voices, low and hushed, coming from a room up ahead. My heart leapt into my throat. Mark motioned sharply for me to stop, pressing his finger to his lips. We inched forward, slipping into the dark edges of the hall until we were close enough to hear more clearly. Light spilled faintly from a crack in the doorway, and the murmurs sharpened into words. Mark leaned toward me and whispered, "That's them. The people I was told about. We have to be extremely careful." His tone carried both warning and resolve, and though fear pressed hard against my ribs, I knew there was no turning back. We crept closer, careful not to betray our presence, until I could see through the narrow opening. Inside, several men sat around a table, their heads bent close as they spoke in near whispers. But what froze me was not them. It was the woman standing with her back toward us, her posture, the tilt of her head, the way she shifted her weight from one leg to the other. It was her. Even from behind, I knew it in my bones. My throat tightened, my chest heaving as I forced out a breathless whisper. "That's her. That's my Sarah." The dam of restraint broke. Without thinking, I stepped into the light of the doorway, my voice breaking the silence of the room. "Sarah." The word rang out sharper than I intended, filled with hope and disbelief. The room fell still, every head turning, and the woman twisted around. Her face, older, harder, but undeniably hers, looked back at me, eyes wide with shock and fear. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice taut, guarded, almost defensive. My body trembled and tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "It's me. It's Mom." "My mother," she whispered, her eyes wide, her voice almost too fragile to hear. My throat tightened as tears burned hot behind my eyes. "Sarah?" "I've been searching for you all this time," I said, my voice breaking. "I thought you were dead. I thought I had lost you forever." The words poured out of me like a flood, and I could barely hold myself together as I reached toward her. Her face shifted, a storm of emotions flashing across it. Fear, shock, and something that looked painfully like recognition. "Mom?" she breathed at last, as if saying it made it real. She glanced nervously back at the men sitting around the table before she rushed toward me and grabbed my hands. Her grip was desperate, trembling. "You shouldn't have come here, it's too dangerous," she whispered, her eyes darting around. I ignored her warning and pulled her into my arms, clutching her as if I could make up for every year lost. "I couldn't let this go," I sobbed into her shoulder. "You are my daughter. You owe me the truth. Tell me what all of this means." My voice shook with both anger and love, the need to understand fighting with the relief of holding her alive in front of me. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked under the weight of it all. I had to disappear, Mom. It was the only way to protect you, to protect all of us." Her words fell heavy, filled with a kind of sorrow I had never heard from her before. I gripped her hands tighter, refusing to let her slip away again. "I don't care what it is," I said fiercely. "I will not leave you to face it alone. Wherever you are, I'll stand with you. I can't believe you're alive. My God, I can't believe it." Behind us, the men exchanged wary looks, their eyes sharp with suspicion. One of them stood suddenly, but Mark raised a steady hand, signaling that we weren't here to threaten or fight. For a moment, tension hung heavy in the air, the silence sharp as glass. Sarah's eyes darted back and forth between me and the men, torn between two worlds, and I could feel that whatever she said next would decide everything. "My only choice was to disappear, Mom," Sarah finally confessed, her voice shaking with every word. "I got pulled into something I never should have touched. At first, they looked like ordinary clients, nothing unusual, but then it changed. They started blackmailing me, threatening you. The only way to keep you safe was to vanish." Her face twisted with pain, and hearing her say it broke something in me. Tears filled my eyes as I tried to steady my voice. "But why, Sarah? Why didn't you tell me? Do you have any idea what it's been like, believing you were gone, burying you, living with that grief every single day?" My voice cracked, the words spilling out like accusations, but all I felt was aching love. She dropped her gaze, her shoulders slumping, and whispered, "I couldn't." They were watching everything. Every move I made, every call, every place I went. They controlled it all. I lived under another name, under their rules. Only recently have I been able to loosen their grip. I cupped her face in my trembling hands and forced her to look at me. "No more," I said firmly, my voice shaking with resolve. "This ends now. I will not let them take another day of your life. We'll get you out of this. You're my daughter, and I'll fight to the end for you." In that moment, I felt a strength in me I hadn't known for years, a fire rekindled by the simple fact that she was alive. Mark stepped closer, his voice calm but firm, carrying the authority of someone who had been planning for this moment. "We'll gather evidence. We'll expose them. But first, we need to get you both out of here safely. Right now, survival is the priority." His eyes locked on Sarah, then on me, steady and unflinching, and I knew he meant every word. Sarah nodded slowly, tears streaking her face, but for the first time her expression softened with relief. She leaned against me, and together we followed Mark out, moving quietly, carefully, every step watched. The night air hit us cold as we slipped back into the car parked nearby. Only when the warehouse was behind us and the city lights began to reappear did I let out the breath I'd been holding. For the first time in years, I wasn't clinging to a memory. I was holding my daughter's hand. The car was silent except for the hum of the engine, and I couldn't take my eyes off my daughter. I kept staring at her profile in the dim light, still unable to believe she was sitting there, alive, within reach. Sarah kept her gaze fixed on the window, her reflection blurred in the glass, as though she couldn't quite bring herself to look back at me. My heart ached, torn between joy and the fear of what she had endured all these years. Mark finally broke the silence, his voice steady and firm. "Sarah, we need to know everything. Every detail matters. If we're going to protect you and take down the people who forced you into this, we can't afford gaps." His words filled the air with a weight that pressed down on all of us, and I could see her tense at the sound of them, as though deciding how much she could bear to tell. She drew in a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap, and began. "It started years ago, when I was working on a project. One client offered me side jobs. Simple at first, nothing that seemed wrong. Then, little by little, the requests changed. They wanted me to help with things I knew were illegal. When I refused, they threatened me. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd go after my family." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt a sharp pain twist inside me. "They watched everything," she continued, pausing to steady herself. "My calls, my movements, even my friends. I felt trapped in a cage I couldn't escape, and when I realized I couldn't fight them directly, I saw only one way out: to make them believe I was gone. I staged my own death because it was the only way I could think of to keep you safe." The words spilled out of her, heavy with shame and exhaustion, as though she had been carrying them for far too long. I reached for her hand, my voice trembling. "You should have come to me. We could have faced it together." My tears blurred her face, but I held on tight. She shook her head, her shoulders trembling. "I was so scared, Mom," she whispered. "Scared they'd hurt you. I thought disappearing was the only way to protect you." My heart broke at her words, but in that moment I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to let fear keep us apart ever again. Mark listened to every word Sarah shared, his jaw set, his eyes sharp with focus. When she finished, he gave a slow nod. "We'll move carefully," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "The first step is to gather proof against these people, but before anything else, we have to protect you." He turned to me, his expression serious. "We don't have much time. Once they realize you've slipped away, they'll come looking." His words sent a chill down my spine, but they also lit a fire inside me. I nodded quickly, determination rising to meet his. "Then we'll do whatever it takes. Nothing matters more than keeping Sarah safe." My voice shook with the force of it, but I meant every word. Mark leaned forward, outlining a plan. Sarah would be hidden away in a safe house he trusted, a place out of reach, while he worked on gathering evidence. "I know a lawyer who can help with the legal side," he added, "and I'll make arrangements for your protection as well, Janet." Tears filled my eyes as I whispered, "Thank you, Mark. Without you, I wouldn't have made it this far." For the first time in years, I felt like someone was standing beside me in this fight. Someone who believed the truth mattered as much as I did. His steady presence felt like a shield, giving me the strength to keep going. Over the next few days, Mark kept his promise. He met with the lawyer, arranged secure housing for Sarah, and began piecing together a case. I spent that time as close to my daughter as possible, holding her through the waves of guilt and fear that washed over her. At night, she sometimes woke in tears, her voice hoarse from nightmares, and I would sit beside her, stroking her hair, whispering that she wasn't alone anymore. "You're not alone, sweetheart," I told her again and again, my arms around her. "We'll get through this together." She clung to me, whispering back, "Thank you, Mom." Hearing those words, after all the years of silence and loss, felt like a miracle. And I vowed right then that I would not rest until she was safe and free. "I never thought anyone would still be fighting for me," Sarah whispered one night, her voice breaking, and those words stayed with me through every step that followed. Mark worked tirelessly, chasing down phone records, digging through paperwork, even finding witnesses willing to testify about the threats and the pressure Sarah had been under. Every piece he uncovered felt like a brick pulled from the wall that had trapped my daughter for so long. Weeks blurred into one another as the case grew stronger. Then finally, the files, recordings, and testimonies were placed in the hands of the police. Plans were drawn for a full operation to bring the group down. It was dangerous, but it was the only way to break the chains that had bound Sarah in silence and fear. The day of the raid, Sarah and I sat together in my kitchen, waiting. The minutes ticked by like hours, my hands clutched around hers, both of us listening for the phone to ring. Fear gnawed at me, but beneath it was a fragile thread of hope I hadn't dared to hold before. When the call finally came, Mark's voice carried steady relief. "It's done. They've all been taken in. You're safe now." I broke down then, holding Sarah so tightly I thought I might never let go. Tears of relief poured down my face as I whispered, You're home now, my girl. It's over. She pressed against me, trembling but steady, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of terror lift from both of us. The nightmare had finally cracked open to let in the light, but even as relief washed over us, I knew the road ahead would not be simple. There were documents to restore, questions to answer, a life to rebuild from the ashes of secrecy. The lawyer guided us through the legal steps, the police supported us with the formalities, but the real work was between us, mother and daughter, learning how to be whole again. And though scars remained, I felt certain of one thing. We had survived together, and that meant we could survive anything. Sarah and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the quiet between us filled with everything we hadn't yet said. Finally, she looked up, her eyes heavy with guilt. "Mom, I'm so sorry for what I did. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was make everything harder." Her voice cracked, and I saw the years of fear and regret written across her face. I reached across the table, taking her trembling hand in mine, and held her gaze. "Sarah, you did what you thought was right. You fought the only way you knew how. I'm proud of you for surviving, and now we're together. That's what matters most." Her lip quivered, tears threatening to spill. "But I don't know how to live anymore," she whispered. "Everything I built is gone. I don't have a job. I lost friends. I don't even know who I am outside of running and hiding." My heart ached, but I smiled at her through my own sadness. "Then we start again, together. You're stronger than you know, and whatever comes, we'll face it side by side." The days that followed were fragile but healing. We cooked meals together, took walks through the neighborhood, and slowly rebuilt the trust that fear had broken. I supported her through the moments when she woke shaking from nightmares, and she leaned on me when the quiet felt too heavy. For the first time in years, our home began to feel like a place of peace instead of grief. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, a knock came at the door. My heart jumped, but when I opened it, relief washed over me. Mark stood there, a folder tucked under his arm, his expression warm but businesslike. "I thought I should bring these in person," he said as he stepped inside. "These are the documents that will help restore Sarah's legal identity." I ushered him to the table, pouring tea as Sarah sat quietly, her eyes wide with cautious hope. "Thank you," I told him, my voice thick with gratitude. "You've given us more than papers, Mark. You've given us a chance to start over." He smiled faintly, setting the folder down between us. "That's exactly what this is," he said. And in that small, ordinary moment with tea steaming in our cups and the weight of the past still heavy but no longer unbearable, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. The beginning of a new life. Soon our conversation shifted away from documents and legal matters and touched something deeper. I looked at Mark, my heart swelling with gratitude I couldn't contain. "Mark," I said softly, "I don't know how to thank you. You've done more for us than I ever thought possible." He gave a small smile and nodded. "You'd have done the same if it were me. It mattered to me to help you bring your family back together." Sarah, sitting across from us, smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. "You've become part of our family, too," she told him, her voice lighter, freer. "Without you, I don't think I would have ever escaped that nightmare." When he left that night, I noticed something had shifted in Sarah. She carried herself differently, a little straighter, a little brighter, as though Mark's steady presence had reminded her that people could still be trusted. It wasn't just his work that saved her. It was the way he had stood beside us, step after step, never letting us feel alone. And for my daughter, that meant more than I could ever explain. Over the next months, Sarah and I worked on rebuilding our lives. We tended the garden, cooked meals side by side, and took long walks in the park, letting the simple rhythm of everyday life heal what fear had once stolen from us. Slowly, we began talking about the future instead of the past. We even started planning a small trip together, something light and new, to remind ourselves that joy was still possible. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lifting, replaced by hope. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Your thoughts, your feelings, what stayed with you. Leave a comment and share it with someone close to you, because stories like this are meant to be felt and passed on. And please subscribe to Tell Me a Story. Your support means the world to us and gives us the strength to keep creating new stories every single day. Don't miss the next incredible one. It's coming very soon. And if you'd like to explore more, you'll find the full catalog of stories linked below. From my heart to yours, thank you for being here with me. Until next time, if this story touched your heart even a little, don't leave quietly. Tell me what you felt. Write a comment, share your thoughts, maybe even your own memories, because I read every word and it truly means so much. And if you want more stories like this, hit that like button and subscribe. It's the best way to let me know you're here with me, and it gives me the strength to keep sharing these journeys with you.